This is Comic Geek Speak, episode 1787, Micro Spotlight, The Amazing Spider-Man, issues 121 through 131, Part 2.
There we go. You got it on Wednesday, and you was psyched about it, going to the volume up. These guys will talk about it, everything the geeks love. From cakes to laser beams, opinions like the seasons on everything you read. And comics, movies, games, toys, artists, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek. Uniting the world's mightiest heroes. This is...
I'm Chris Eberly.
I'm Ian Levinstein.
I'm Shane Kelly.
And I'm Adam Murdoch.
Comic Geek Speak.
Yes.
We'll get that blasted Spider-Man.
We'll make him infamous.
And Ian, we're going to have more cans of Coca-Cola in this episode as well.
Oh, we sure as hell are. Because
at the soda fountain.
Yes, we'd like to give the world a Coke, and boy, do they have a lot of them. Returning for part 2, but of course, is Mr. Dan Gvozden back again for more, because we haven't driven him away yet.
I feel like I'm becoming like a swing or like a pitch hitter for like the Justice League here. You know, like just bring me in every now and again, and I'll leave a few issues later.
Now, Dan, it's the Avengers. This is Marvel, not DC.
I understand. It just felt more right that we're sitting around a table and being silly. I don't know.
Fair enough.
I'm okay with the DC reference.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So Dan's the Phantom Stranger. There you go.
Nice. And we conclude this epic micro spotlight tonight with the back half, issues 127 to 131. A little less meaty than the last time, but still plenty to talk about.
Oh, yes.
Now, before we do, gentlemen, I'm going to go in with a little bit of extra credit related to our last episode that I did, as I was curious if it existed, and then it turned out it did. About 2 days ago, I went and read What If number 24.
Ooh.
Which is What If Gwen Stacy Had Not Died.
Yes, well done.
Yeah, and this one, What If used to be a very different type of book, I feel like, than what it turned out to be. Like, they would do actual what ifs, like setting up like storylines rather than full stories. And that's very much what this issue feels like, because rather than give us like a full conclusion of like what would have happened had Gwen died, we get the setup for what feels like would have been 12 issues of the Amazing Spider-Man comic. So we don't get like the full story told, but essentially what happens if Gwen doesn't die? Well, then Norman Osborn doesn't die. Green Goblin is like miraculously cured by the power of love from his son. And then right before he does, though, while he's still Green Goblin, he puts in the mail an envelope to J. Jonah Jameson telling him exactly who Spider-Man is. And from that point forward, Peter Parker is a wanted criminal, and he can't be around his family anymore because, you know, that's what he is. You know, he's persona non grata. Everybody knows he's Spider-Man. And then what happens after that? Well, you'd have to exist in that reality to actually know.
We just did a what if episode on our show where we covered all the Spider-Man related what ifs, and this is one of them.
Yeah.
And what's funny about this one is it's one of the rare what ifs that actually has kind of like a happy ending where like more people don't die, which is kind of nice. But my favorite detail in the entire thing is what you said, Ian, where the Goblin just mails a letter with Spider-Man's secret identity in it.
Yeah.
It's so absurd, but I also feel like it's probably in my future somewhere.
And stay tuned to Annual to find out more about that. But also, I will bring this up as well because this issue does not forget the fact that Peter Parker had the flu when he was fighting Green Goblin. Because we did bring that up last episode, how that was sort of like a dropped story point. And he makes sure to bring up on a bridge that looks a lot more like the Washington Bridge this time around, the George Washington Bridge, than the last time. You know, the fact that he was sick, and that might have contributed to why he, you know, lost to the Green Goblin. So nice to see that story point come up at least in a what if somewhere.
Ian, fantastic heroic effort there. Well done, sir.
Yep. And the writer for this was Mr. Tony Isabella, and the pencils were by Gil Kane and Frank Giacola, by the way. So
what a team there.
Yeah, I know. Wanted to make sure to bring that up because that's some epic teamwork right there. And pretty damn good issue. But wasn't the entire issue. After that, they had a Eternals story that is irrelevant to what we're first talking about here.
Yeah, What If in its heyday was a really fun book.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep. Especially for a multiverse fan like myself, and of course, obviously, Murd.
As you say, my friend, as you say.
Mm-hmm. But we divert back to the main title of interest here, and where we left off, which is the beginning of a 2-part Vulture storyline in The Amazing Spider-Man.
Yep, issue 127, The Dark Wings of Death. And once again, we're talking about Jerry Conway's run. And, of course, by now he's joined, as we mentioned before, in our previous episode by Ross Andrew, who's a favorite Spider-Man penciler of mine and other people on the show.
Yep.
And inking by, I think I mispronounced his name. He was a great inker, Frank Giacola.
I think it's Giacola.
Giacola, and I think it's Dave Hunt. Mm-hmm. Interesting. I just noticed this for the first time. On letters, Tom Morzakowski, colorist Glynis Ween. I think they're going to gain even greater fame working on the X-Men later with Claremont. If that rings a bell.
Good point.
What I wanted to say right off the bat is that the subsequent issue, 128, was, I think, the second Bronze Age Spider-Man comic I ever read in a reprint of Marvel Tales 105 from 1979. So I was 6 years old. I was on a family trip in the Caribbean. I don't remember which island. And my father bought me this Marvel Tales and read me the entire story and did the voices of all the characters.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
And I was completely hooked, although dismayed when I realized that it wasn't actually the real Vulture in the story. But I really dig this story because it's like a 2-part whodunit, and it really shows the investigative powers of Peter Parker, which are pretty extensive, actually, when you think about it.
Yeah. Being
a longstanding news journalist, a photojournalist, and so forth. But this is a 2-part I really enjoy. Plus, when we opened that first page, I was thinking of the great points that both Dan and Ian made in the last episode, which is that the perspectives Ross Andrew captures of Spider-Man in the city, I think they're without peer. Like this opening splash page, he just gets such a great sense of height and where Spider-Man is in terms of just, regular people on the street.
Yep.
Yeah.
So well done.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, no, his angle work and just like the picture that he paints is very, very hard to match. Yeah.
What do we think? I want to start. I love the cover to 127.
Mm-hmm.
What do we think of that cover?
Well, I think MJ looks like Poison Ivy.
I wouldn't have thought of that. Man. Yeah, you're right.
It is a great outfit that Andrew gives her there.
Yeah.
I like the portrayal of Harry that we get pretty much throughout this, where he almost looks like he's just like saying like don't go there, girl, to Peter on the cover. Like it's almost like a just a slight little like tap away versus a push or something like that. And that maniacal look on his face, that's exactly what Harry looks like the rest of the issue.
I miss covers being this busy. It's very rare that we get covers these days that show you so many different elements from a story.
Yeah.
And use actually like graphic fonts in an interesting way. I mean, I don't really know what all these arrows are for. Like, there's no real sense of how I'm supposed to read this page, but I don't really care all that much. And like the last time I can really think of them doing this is like the Brand New Day era. They tried to kind of inject some of this, 70s style into it. And then even dare say it, the One More Day story, they had like those very graphic covers like this, but it's really out of fashion in modern Marvel comics.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, you're right. No, I do miss it.
Yeah. It's rare to see word balloons or captions of any kind on comics.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Dan, this is a John Romita Sr. cover, isn't it?
It does appear that way. Yeah. Yes. I mean,
it looks like
if it's not, it's a really really good impression.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to point out right at the back, because you mentioned this in the previous episode as well, is that, and I've noticed this in my reading over the years, I don't think anyone does more interesting interiors of apartments than Ross Andrew. The beaded curtain in MJ's apartment, the beanbag chair. We get to the Spider-Man issues. When he goes into Peter's apartment, he's never made it look more hip. He even shows off Peter's record collection. There's just an attention to detail in his work that I find you don't find with a lot of other artists. It's such a joy just to go through the pages when he's drawing them.
The one thing that I kept wanting to do throughout this issue and the next couple of issues is to just swipe away that one piece of hair on Peter's head that just keeps like hanging down, like it's like he took the comb to it and it just completely escaped it, and it's always there. It's always out of place. I mean, I get it, but at the same time, it's like, come on, man, you came so close to a perfect flop of hair.
Andrew's people are just not as handsome as Romita's people are. I mean, Harry Osborn might as well, he's got a 5 head of all 5 heads. He is just he is a pretty terrifying man whose face is just scrunched into his chin.
Yeah.
But even the Vulture is exaggerated into a kind of more animalistic creature. Adrian Toombs always kind of had a big nose, but Ross Andrew really transforms him into a bird-like man. I think beyond even Ditko, who obviously really exaggerated his characters. But I guess that's part of the story too, right? Is he's kind of turning into a bit of a monster.
Did we enjoy because as we said in the beginning, I think we found some of these issues not as meaty as the previous installment, but did we enjoy what Conway and et al. Are doing here in this 2-parter?
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah, it's one of those rare occasions when the Vulture actually succeeds in being somewhat scary. Yes, and I think the little the whodunit angle, this added wrinkle of sci-fi B-movie creepiness that he throws in here, where the Vulture becomes not just an old man in a suit, but a monster beast form that a scientist mutates himself into. And the addition of the exaggeratedly avian features, as Dan was saying, the really large hawk nose and the snaggle teeth and the actual bird talons, the organic wings. It gives us that extra touch of the bizarre.
They would take this a bit further in later years in the Brand New Day era, where they created this actual mutant Vulture character as the new Vulture. He was all red, and he could vomit on things dissolved it. Really not a great character that has really never returned again. Those issues are more notable for the fact that Peter loses his job at the Bugle for photoshopping images, which is kind of odd, but okay. That was the thing that finally did him in, not gross malpractice of taking pictures of himself.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Vulture is one of those characters I feel like they never really knew how to handle appropriately, and different writers have really done a bunch of different things. He's not as mishandled as, say, the timeline of the Lizard, but Adrian Toombs, even in his second appearance, they're get rid of that guy and bring in Blackie Drago to replace him, who is this other prison mate of his. And I mean, even here they're kind of already doing it again, is replacing him with someone else. Spoilers for this mystery. And Dan Slott, even with his record-breaking run of Spider-Man issues, only wrote two stories with the Vulture in it, because he just famously doesn't like writing the Vulture and doesn't see the appeal of the character. So, I think he's a A-list Spider-Man villain, but kind of reluctantly.
Yeah. I think I prefer the Vulture on Spider-Man the Animated Series more than I prefer him in the comics. That, and it might just be because I grew up with that animated series, but they actually used him pretty well at times on the animated series, and I have very rare instances where I could turn to a issue of Amazing Spider-Man and go, "Oh, hey, that was a great Vulture issue."
He also has a half dozen kids. Every time you read a Vulture story, it's I'm the grandchild of Vulture, or I'm the daughter of Vulture. And you kind of lose track. He's just sowing his wild oats all over New York City. It's just such a strange, it's the last character you ever want to picture in the sack. but yet he has like more partners than any villain in this series.
Yeah, Dan, I just read Identity Disc and Marvel Knight Spider-Man, the Miller Dodson, the first arc of that this past summer. So I know what you're talking about. It's suddenly he has like grandkids all over the map.
Yeah, they just introduced one the other day in like Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. He has like a black granddaughter who is also a vulture. And if it's not a kid, then he's like leading a gang of kids. There's like the Vulturions who show up in like the early 90s the late 80s when Web starts up.
Web, I think.
Yeah, and then there's I mix it up because I associate it with Venom because the symbiote shows up later in that story arc. And then, like, in Dan Slott's run, he runs, like, a gang of, like, the Vulturites. There's always, like, some, like, I don't know. He's like a character from Oliver Twist.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
One thing I want to point out, though, about the Vulture, I'm recalling that during the classic Roger Stern run in the 80s, I remember him doing some good stuff with the Vulture.
Yeah.
And when J.M. DeMatteis had his great run on Spectacular Spider-Man, I remember he did a two-part of the Vulture that involved Aunt May that was also really well done and emphasized actually how old the Vulture was and the impact that was having on him.
Yeah.
So,
see, now you say that about Oliver Twist, and I see Vulture flying in the air with these child minions singing "Pick a Pocket or Two" in a very Albert Finney Scrooge kind of way.
I would say I think those Stern issues are the best Vulture stories that there are. I mean, he famously loved the Vulture. He's like the one exception, but his run is also famous for like putting Spider-Man up against like Cobra and Juggernaut. So he's not a guy that likes conventional Spider-Man villains.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about Stern another time because you got me going right there. But notice a couple pages here. First of all, they're assembling the Spider-Mobile. So they're dragging that out. It's not just in one issue. It's going to go through this whole arc we're talking about. The Spider-Mobile is being assembled.
Mm-hmm. And I love the way that Conway decides to cut to that right in the middle of Spider-Man's duel with the Vulture. Like the Vulture's on the loose. He's trying to murder Mary Jane, and Spider-Man wakes up in an alley and thinks, the Vulture's gone. Well, I guess I'll go work with Johnny Storm on this stupid dune buggy now. Ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah.
The next page, Conway always takes us back to what's going on with Harry, and reminds us that Peter and Harry are still technically roommates and living together in their pad, their swinging pad that goes back to the Silver Age. But all is not well in their domestic situation.
I don't know if it's on purpose or not, or whether it's just a switch to Ross Andrews' art, but I do appreciate how Harry's cornrows look a little bit more disheveled. And I don't know whether or not that's just a switch of artists and how he decides to draw them, or whether that was intentional. But it does make him look that much more crazed and maniacal that his hair isn't perfectly kept.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. We
should also mention that Peter, at this point, because of the strain of his life with Spider-Man, is basically flunking out of college.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I noticed that. I didn't know he did that in any run.
It took him a long time to graduate from college. A long time. In terms of issues.
Also because he missed his he misses one credit for a gym class.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's later
so
on.
he has to make that up even after graduating. About the Harry Osborn thing, I love that Peter kind of puts his hand on his shoulder and says, can't we still be friends? And I feel like, and maybe it's the movies that kind of did this, but there's this romantic idea of how close Harry and Peter are. But if you really read the first 100+ issues of Spider-Man, there's very few scenes of them actually being buddy-buddy.
Mm-hmm.
The scene where they Amazing Spider-Man 39, where Romita comes on and everybody suddenly becomes far more friendly than they were during the Dicko run. And he and Harry bond there. But that's really the peak of their kind of friendly relationship. And otherwise they were just roommates who kind of fought all the time. And I would love to have explored more early stories with them being buddies. And over the years we've gotten retcons that, show this in Forgotten Tales. But really, you'd be hard-pressed to find a good Harry and Peter are buddies story.
Oh wow.
Yeah, the most you get, he's right, Dan's right. The most you get is like one comes home, Peter has to hide like his costume under a bathrobe or something, and they'll talk quickly about their dating, and that's really it. So they also mentioned, though, Harold mentioned, like, come on, man, because Peter can never pay the rent. Harry says, well, you did all the tutoring with me, so, that more than made up for it. That there's always stuff like you think that's happening off panel you never see. Yeah. Basically.
Although since Dan mentioned the movies, I'll just mention the Harry Osborn moment that continues to be a reference with my friends to this day. How's the pie, sir? So good. So good.
I like, by the way, after the Vulture attacks them when they're in Flash's car, and Peter makes the Ralph Nader comment about his seatbelt. We should remember that Ralph Nader was a big advocate back then for better safety in automobiles. Because remember, seatbelts weren't as common as they are now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's a fun little reference. Then, of course, we have creepy Professor Warren. Ian's favorite.
Miles Warren looks creepy enough without the Jackal costume on. Like, he really just has that air of creepiness to him. And he's a little bit too concerned, I feel like, about Peter Parker's future. It's almost like playing his hand a little bit too much. No professor is this interested in the passing or failing of a child, I feel like, or an adult for that matter, because he's in freaking college.
Right. He does come off a bit stalkerish, doesn't he?
Yes, he do. Yes, he do. Yeah.
Imagine that.
Yeah, I know. The man running around in a giant green outfit is somehow stalkerish. Like, gee.
Yeah.
The battle between the Vulture on campus, what struck me, and I thought about Ian here, was the look on Harry's face as he's skulking from behind the tree and his delight at the apparent defeat of Spider-Man. Like, look at that expression.
I in my head now, and this is headcanon, I don't care if it's true or not, this is exactly what Harry does for the next, 10 years of Spider-Man comics. Is he just stands behind trees and gawks saying, little does he know that I'm the new Green Goblin, but the new Green Goblin never shows up. He just continues to just stalk behind Spider-Man, making statements like this until eventually he finally does show up.
I'm struck by his protruding gum line. It's really kind of terrifying.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's so great.
Does anybody mind if I read a letter from the letters page from this issue?
Please.
No?
Okay, because they're still printing letters about 121 and 122. And this is from Jane Starr of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Imagine this. Imagine if this woman had access to Twitter today. Dear Cruds, you evil-eyed, black-handed, bow-legged, flint-hearted, claw-fingered, foul-bellied, bloodthirsty orcs. You killed Gwen! Multiple exclamation points. She was the best thing to happen to Peter Spidey Parker one-man soap opera in ages. Wait till I get you. This had better turn out to be an illusion or something, or else.
Wow.
Well, sign Stan Lee. I mean...
And then from Richard Nathan from Van Moyes, California. Somebody ought to throw Jerry Conway off the George Washington Bridge to see if the fall kills him before impact.
Jesus.
Wow.
You do that today, man, they're going to be knocking down your door.
I can't believe they printed that.
Yeah.
Right? And to me now, it's officially cemented that the letters page is actually the precursor to Twitter. That's the exact type of anonymity that you could have in a comic book letter page back then. Is the same anonymity. I hate pronouncing that word that you can get on Twitter. So go figure.
Have you guys, you know what? I just realized this might be wildly off topic, but it's about a letters page.
Yeah.
Have you guys discussed the identity of that one guy that writes into every single comic letters page?
No.
No.
Oh my God. I'm going to find
with
this
this all.
guy's name.
Are we thinking Uncle Elvis or T.M. Maple or...
No, hold on. I'm going to find his name. You know what? Forget I said anything, and we'll come back to it.
Okay.
Please.
Sounds good. Can I also comment on the Vulture's teeth in this issue?
Oh, yes.
I mean, I know it's part of the transformation, but
Right.
that is a heck of amount of teeth right there.
Yeah.
They're strong enough to rend Spider-Man's webbing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Hein.
Check out the chompers on that guy.
You guys ready for 128?
Yep.
All right. So again, this is one of the earliest Spider-Man comics I ever read in a Marvel Tales reprint. And I remember as a kid, the splash page of him falling, just so I was so absorbed by that, just because I was like, God, look how high up he is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And like, how the hell is he going to get out of this? That really captivated me as a kid.
Yeah.
And I like how he realizes there's nothing to web to.
Yep.
Versus, like, say, the cartoon where you be webbing miles above the earth and still get there.
God, yeah. Yes, even in the Spider-Man the Animated Series, that would happen sometimes, and like they loved rendering their buildings, but occasionally he'd just randomly be throwing out webs, and I'm like, you're in the middle of nowhere. What are you webbing to?
And of course, the great Conway narration as he talks to the audience in that Stan Lee style, but again, it's his own twist on it, which I just was always captivating right from the get go.
Mm-hmm. How about the cover to this one, by the way, Chris? I mean, talking about word balloons and things like that on the cover. Telling the story right there. It's like, it can't be you. It can't. I put you behind bars only a few minutes ago. No jail can hold the Vulture. Not when I have you have sworn your death. Like, wow, that's drama.
Love the shadow.
Yep.
Yeah, it looks like a Romita cover. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, even though the story on the cover isn't quite what happens in the issue because he didn't just put him away a few minutes ago. But,
Yeah.
I feel like Andrew must have some like mandate that every issue that he draws starts with Spider-Man falling from the sky. Like every one of them, he's upside down, way up in the sky. I mean, what a great way to start off an issue.
Yes, absolutely.
And then the web trampoline saves him.
Yep. And right before his web shooters went on empty, for that matter, classic Spider-Man moment there of like, I just got out by the skin of my teeth.
Whew.
I could have been killed. Yeah, no, it's. I remember even as a kid, I wasn't accustomed to superheroes having this kind of discussion with themselves about what they just went through. Oh, God, I love this character.
Now I know he usually has a lot of thought balloons, but in this page in particular, he's got a lot of out loud talking to himself, which seemed a little odd to me.
I talk to myself in the car all the time, much to the chagrin of people probably driving alongside me. But what do we think of Mary Jane in this story? Because she's I don't know if it's fair to say it's an unflattering portrayal of her, but it's definitely a jarring removal from how we're used to seeing her as a character. How did you respond to that, Dan?
I just kind of appreciated that she was brought into the action for once.
Yeah.
I feel like she's often just ancillary, but here she's like almost involved in a murder. To me, at least, it seems like early positioning to kind of move her into the spotlight for Spider-Man's life. I mean, she's a little more direct and also a little more damsel-y than I'm used to. But I don't mind it, honestly. Like, I liked having her along for the journey. And I think if you're going to do, like, MJ, that's kind of where she belongs. I think she makes a good kind of partner for a lot of this stuff.
Absolutely. Ian, I have to point out, when Peter encounters Flash and MJ on the stairwell at ESU, come on, MJ, let's go get a Coke and cool off.
Take a drink. Take a drink every time you see the word Coke. Take a drink, and that. I was thinking the exact same thing, my friend. I was just going to bring it up.
Fantastic.
Now, is that Glory Grant on the very next panel?
No.
Okay, all right. I was wondering about that.
Good reference though, because it looks a lot like Glory Grant when she eventually is introduced, but it's just a random woman who's working at the registration office.
Got it.
And just lets Peter in to rifle through the files.
Yeah, but Peter's being very charming.
I guess.
Plus, she has got the cigarette holder, which I find interesting there as well.
And the page before that, the introduction to Dr. Shallot, was a real onion of a man. Oh
God.
I mean, the way they introduce him is a little bit over the top. Spider-Man talking about how, nice guy. That Dr. Shallot reminds me a little of my Uncle Ben when he and Aunt May first took me in. Like, I mean, I kind of
just for one conversation,
exactly,
2 minutes long,
right? It also like set up like, okay, great, he's the Vulture. Before I even got to the end of the issue, it's like, okay, he said something way too nice about him. He's the Vulture.
Yep. It's Scooby-Doo level foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I'm enjoying Peter as detective. Then, of course, when we get to him encountering J. Jonah Jameson at the Bugle, and this is a classic Jameson dressing down Peter. I don't know which of us is the bigger idiot. You for being such a blithering fallop, or me for hiring you?
Love it.
Does your crummy life sell newspapers? Get out of here, Parker. I'm glad I don't fire you for this. And then for good measure, get out!
He's the best.
Oh,
And then in comes Ned, who is just devoid of a personality. I commissioned a piece of artwork recently that I wanted Ned Leeds to be in, and I was like, man, what kind of art direction do I give to this artist to draw Ned? Like, I think I ultimately went with, he just looks like everybody. Like, can you put a name tag on him? Like, how could you discernibly pick out Ned?
Yeah, the fact that the most interesting thing that happened to Ned Leeds is that he dies, like, says a lot about the character. Like, I would have loved for him to have more personality, and the convoluted was he or wasn't he about his history as well, on who he turns out to be but isn't, and the most complicated, reveal probably ever in Spider-Man history. As God, they could have done so much better with that. Yep.
Ian, props for not actually revealing that for those who have not read those stories, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah. Plus, I'll also say a couple of pages later, when he's swinging over to the piers, I do need to point out the New Yorker in me did need to check to see whether or not Pier 20 is off 23rd Street. It's not. Pier 20 doesn't even exist from what I can see, but if it did, it would be down further towards like where the World Trade Center is. Like Pier 63 or 66 or so is probably around where 23rd Street is. So, but again, it's the Marvel Universe, so it exists there. That's all that matters.
Wait, do they just skip 20 in real life? They're like, we can't have a 20.
I'm sure there probably was one back in the day, but like where the piers are now are very like hit or miss, because a lot of them were either like removed at one point or just not in service. So I think like the piers literally do go from like Pier 18 to Pier 23. Like I'm sure there was a Pier 20 at one point, but it's not like specifically marked these days.
Well, maybe it was where this one is, and they realized they're way out of line, so they just removed it.
Sure, Shane. Let's go with that. Oh, boy.
I find the Vulture more frightening in this story than I normally do, though.
I agree. Yeah.
Agree.
Yeah. It's the mutation. It's the fact that he's a cold-blooded killer and is doing everything he can to sort of keep the secret of what he's been involved in. And I like how they show Spider-Man using different facets of like the city's infrastructure. He's got informers. He's befriended a taxi cab driver who's going to help him out. It's always important to remember that Spider-Man is a New Yorker and benefits from just knowing sort of the byways of that city. And I think you see a bit of that here.
And you sort of get that a little bit later with the Spider-Mobile too, about getting around. What's he need a car for, kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, we'll get there, Shane. We'll get there.
Spider-Man needs a car. What are you talking about? I mean, come on. When he runs out of webbing, what else is he supposed to take?
I remember in our last episode, Dan used a great phrase, body horror. And when he forces Shallot to drink the potion.
Yeah.
And, like, Shallot has this really demonstrative reaction to it. It's creepy. I mean, the whole mutation thing with the Vulture is creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's well done.
It's very well done storytelling.
Also, talking about the Scooby-Doo nature of this storyline as well, the fact that she has like an identical twin who's not really identical, like a roommate that will just like her.
Yeah. Conway missed an opportunity to notch up the freak factor a little bit more here, because I was expecting it to come out that those two, the lab assistant and her roommate, looked so much alike because they had been guinea pigs for Dr. Shallot's biomutation process.
Yeah, something.
Yeah.
Something.
Or even Murd setting up the Jackal himself and what his future scientific meanderings are, and setting up cloning. Yeah.
Yep, just as the lab assistant and her roommate became identical, Joyce Delaney became identical to Gwen Stacy.
There you go.
All right. Well, should we move on to a key Bronze Age issue, gentlemen?
Sure.
Yep. I had forgotten just how big the Punisher's skull was when it was first introduced. That it was a skull that went all the way down to the belt, and that the belt included the white, and then it's just nothing but blue after that, except for the boots.
Well, this issue in particular, outside of normal comic book talk and shows, anybody know where else this can be seen? This particular issue. It's a key plot point in a part of a movie.
Mallrats?
Wait, involving Spider-Man?
No, it's involving this issue of Spider-Man.
Huh.
Really?
Yep. I never would have guessed it in a million years, and I saw it in the theater.
What is it?
Coyote Ugly.
Oh. Wow.
The one guy in it is trying to track down a copy of this issue, and he's doing it through like a good chunk of the whole movie.
It's really funny that you bring up Coyote Ugly specifically, Shane, because the original Coyote Ugly actually just closed for good.
Oh wow!
Like maybe about 3 weeks ago.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's other Coyote Uglies still open in other parts of the world, but the original in New York just shut down for good.
Oh wow!
Yeah, go figure.
Yep.
I find interesting word off the bat is that the Punisher we know today obviously is very different here, because even though they have the classic iconic costume on the cover, in the interior his boots and gloves are sort of a midnight blue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's an interesting little change there. But what do we think? Okay, so the Jackal's also introduced in this issue. I know from our previous discussion, some people aren't big fans of the Jackal.
Yeah.
Well, I don't mind it, but he really looks oddly creepy here.
So,
I'm thinking a gremlin.
Yeah. And I'll give you that much, Shane. My problem is introducing a character who's, at least in the face, looks this much like the Green Goblin right after you get rid of the Green Goblin. Kind of takes that away. Even while Harry is discussing how he's going to become the new Green Goblin.
Yeah.
It's almost lazy.
Yeah.
The costume just isn't intimidating either.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess ostensibly the Green Goblin wasn't that intimidating when he was first introduced, and people would really ratchet up the mania of that character.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing about the Jackal's suit has no contrast built into it. It's just like a flat green thing with ears. And they've changed it over the years. The 90s Jackal was really goofy, like some weird furry costume. And then I actually kind of like the more modern Jackal that was ultimately, well, I won't reveal the twist of who the modern Jackal was, but with the kind of like Anubis head and red jacket. I thought that was a cool design and won me back over if that's going to be the future of the character. But I don't know. I always thought this was such a bizarre, like, I know that they were trying to stick with the animal thing, but do people associate jackals with being green? Just like, where did this design come from? I guess I could have asked Jerry, but like inherently in asking that question is like criticism. So I kind of left that alone.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't, not knowing much about the background of this time period. I mean, I'm only reading these issues as we're discussing them kind of. For the shows, I couldn't tell if it was a mutation and he was naked and furry.
Yeah.
And then later in the issue, he talks about how it's a costume that nobody can figure out who he is. And I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of a creepy, weird costume to wear.
That's exactly what I was thinking, Shane. And I think the art doesn't actually really do a good job of that.
No.
It's a little bit too convincing of a costume to be a costume, except for the fact that he has no junk.
Yeah. but especially in this early pages, it's all covered. Like when the Punisher's holding his gun, he's behind it and everything's placed where you can't see anything. Mm-hmm. And then down the bottom right-hand panel, it's towards the bottom, it's shaded. Like it's very ambiguous at this point. And I'm like, I don't really want to see that, but that's a weird way to draw it.
And just the way they introduce him too, like he's just sort of just there, like he doesn't really get a lead up or anything. Like he doesn't get like like an introduction of like being a man in the shadows or anything like that. He's just sort of just like all of a sudden I'm a major player and I'm hanging out with the Punisher because reasons. Like
yeah.
Well, yeah, actually both of them are kind of just dropped onto the front page like that without introduction or fanfare.
Yeah.
It's kind of an odd way to begin a story and introduce two recurring antagonists.
Exactly.
And in the back of my head, I had just within the last week watched the episode of West Wing where C.J. Craig does the Jackal, and as I'm reading this, all I can hear is C.J.'s voice going, "The Jackal," and I'm like, it's not working for me yet.
What do we think of the way the Punisher is introduced in the story and how he's portrayed?
Hot and cold, I think, is the way I feel about it. There's some things dropped in there that are, still a part of the character to this day, like, his war against crime and things like that, and him being in the service in one way or the other is introduced, but and I talked about this last episode, it's still a very flat, I think you're a bad guy because reasons, and then, oh no, you're not a bad guy, okay, great, we're not going to fight anymore type of story. And I think that also just takes away from the character of the Punisher a lot in that way, that he's introduced as a misunderstanding rather than the Punisher.
I think when we consider the time period, this is 1974. Is it still 73? And Conway mentioned this, and I read the quote from the introduction where he talks about the time period. But
it's 74.
Urban. What's that, Ian? I'm sorry.
It's 74. It's February 1st, 1974. Yeah.
So,
which means it probably hit shelves near the end of 73.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So urban crime is really becoming an issue in New York City. I think the movie Death Wish comes out with Charles Bronson in 1974, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So it's a period down the zeitgeist where a character like the Punisher, you can understand why they introduced him. I would be surprised if he was also inspired by the pulp novel vigilante Mac Bolan, the Executioner, who was already around by this time. But what I found interesting was that they do go into a little bit, just at the very end, the Punisher is obviously a tormented figure, and Spider-Man begins to realize, wow, maybe my problems aren't as bad as this guy's. Basically, but
well, and also, I mean, bringing up the fact that New York City has become a scum and villainy type of place. Even earlier on in the issue, with Spidey being like, it's the air in this crummy burg. Down on the streets, it's bad enough, but up here in Spidey country, it's positively murder. And speaking of murder, and then transitioning from there, but like They're talking about, it looks like the fair crooks of Manhattan have finally come back from summer vacation, yada, 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 that it's definitely, not your mom and dad's New York in the early 70s. And, as somebody who grew up way after that, and now we're experiencing this lovely pandemic here where crime is on the uptick again in some ways, it's just an interesting bit of history to point out there of the New York of then. And how, in some ways, things change, and then in some ways, they stay the same.
And I think it's interesting that, considering the Punisher becomes, one of Marvel's almost like an industry unto himself in the 1980s.
Sure.
I mean, when we really get into the grim and gritty period in comics, and boy, was the character was just made for that. And we all know what a huge property for the Punisher was.
Yeah.
In that time period.
Yep.
We should also remember that his first several appearances are all solely in Amazing Spider-Man, and then I think his appearance in the black and white Marvel magazine, and that's about it early on. So,
if you want a really great Punisher issue with Spider-Man that I think really starts to see the character come into his own, I'd recommend Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 15, which has art from Frank Miller. And it's written by Denny O'Neil. And
great
it's
pick, Dan.
Really wonderful.
Yes.
You really get the sense that Miller's doing like all the heavy lifting. But it's like Spider-Man and the Punisher versus Dr. Octopus in the Daily Bugle's printing press. And it's really great. And it has these great kind of chapter bookmarks or introductions with Jameson, who has to keep changing the headlines of his newspaper. And so every few pages you get a new front page of Jameson's newspaper. And it's really great. But what's cool about it, if you like the Punisher, is that the Punisher gets a little more violent, and you get a little more of that mania starts getting introduced there. And to me, that was really where the Punisher was kind of finally born into the character that we know him as today.
It's a great annual. I'm glad you brought that up. And then you think about what Miller did with the Punisher and Daredevil, and then he's really off to the races there as a character.
For sure.
Also, speaking of Mania, Dan, since you brought it up, a couple of pages later, he's still there, waiting for me because he knows I'm the Green Goblin. I thought he was my friend, but I realize now no one is Harry Osborn's friend. I'm all alone with my inevitable destiny. Like, whoa,
Must
dude.
have been a tree to hide behind.
Yeah, I'm thinking of from the Harvey Birdman Attorney at Law show, Stephen Colbert's character with the shrink ray, like.
Shrink gun.
Yes, exactly. Like, whoa, dude, dial it down. You're at 11.
And then that panel where he's skulking away in the darkness, alone with my inevitable destiny. And then Conway says in the narration, "We'll worry some more about Harry's sanity next issue. Right now."
Man, oh man. And and then of course transitioning over yet again, I'm Miles Warren and I'm going to be creepy because that's. But like, what's the difference between in time here, where like he's talking to Mary Jane, and then a page and a half later he's getting whacked across the room in an improbable pose by the Punisher. That happened.
Maybe they hadn't decided yet whether or not Warren was the Jackal yet.
That's very possible. Or they just forgot to say, across town 5 hours later or something like that in a bubble, which is also possible.
By the way, jumping back a little bit, when Peter arrives at the Bugle, this is such a great panel, and it's vintage Spider-Man, when he forces himself to have a smile.
I was going to call that out as the most disturbing image in this entire series of
Oh, my God.
He makes you worried about Peter's sanity as well. He just looked nuts there, yeah.
Yep.
Looks like research Joaquin Phoenix did for his film role last year.
Wow.
Another panel to point out in terms of strange facial distortions is this like close-up of the Punisher in the upper right panel a few pages after that one with this like really red background.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
It's like he's like some like Italian gangster or something, or mobster rather, but also melded with the chipmunks. It's just a weird, like Andrew was always better in costume than out of costume, I felt, with characters.
Yeah. I love the way he draws Frank Castle's hair in this issue with the bushy eyebrows, the 6-inch widow's peak.
He kind of looks a little bit like Steven Van Zandt.
Yeah.
Like, just to throw that reference out there, because you mentioned mobsters, immediately my brain went to The Sopranos, and I was trying to like piece together like who he looks the most like. But like a young Steven Van Zandt probably looked a lot like that.
Other favorite panels, I just love the one of Peter sewing his mask back together and pricking his finger with a giant ouch.
Yep.
This guy is fighting people with razor sharp claws, but pricking yourself with a needle, heaven forbid.
My absolute favorite panel of this entire issue is, again, a little too Scooby-Doo that the Punisher, of all people, would leave the name of his distributor on the back of the gun.
Oh yeah, the plate on the butt of the gun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Conway does redeem that later on. You know, when Punisher and Spider-Man finally get around to talking with each other, you know, Spider-Man straight up asks him, "Did you actually leave the nameplate of the manufacturer on this weapon?" And the Punisher says, "Do you think I'm stupid?"
Yeah.
And it's then they realize, oh yeah, that was a plant that the Jackal left there.
Fair enough.
When you talked about the way the Punisher looked in that panel, I had to look it up because I couldn't remember the actor's name. I thought of Frank Severo, who was in Goodfellas. He was in Going Ape in 1981. He was in The Wedding Singer as the brother-in-law.
Oh yeah. I know exactly what you mean. In Goodfellas, he ends up in the freezer. Yep.
Yes. Yep.
No, you're right, Shane. Good call. It's interesting though, because when you think about how characters develop over time, and when you think about the Garth Ennis Punisher, right, which is so far away from the Punisher we see here.
Yeah.
Yeah, a Punisher who's upset about a man falling to his death by accident.
Yeah.
Versus a guy who will just burn an entire bar down and kill like every single B villain in the Spider-Man universe until they decide which ones actually died in the fire.
I want to jump back for a minute. This thing I always think Jerry Conway did so well when Peter goes to the Bugle to deliver his film, and just the rage of Jameson. and just the histrionics and the bluster, and Robbie's always calm and cool, like Peter Parker, long time no see, amigo, and then Jameson's raging. This is great stuff. Like when you go to the heart of Spidey's supporting cast, I don't think anybody does it better than Conway. Like this is. You got Betty Brant, like, always the steady secretary who's, always friendly to Peter, despite their relationship from long ago. Mm-hmm. She's the same hairstyle, by the way.
She does.
But I love the raging.
I do like that.
You
Betty.
Idiot! I want pictures of him, and I want them now.
I do like that we had Betty in this in these couple of issues here. It's nice whenever she shows up. I've always liked Betty Brant as a character. She had a lot more play again in the mid 90s, early 2000s as a supporting character, but it's just nice to see her in any way. Really, I've always liked the character. Well, they're setting up the fact that she's going to have her Christmas Eve party.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
to play a key role in the next two issues.
Yep. And before we wrap this issue, the very last panel, I swear he should have had a thumb up and be winking, the Jackal, because like it's almost like Mixie-X-Pitolek level. With the, if I'm going to take over the city, I must first destroy you, and I will. The Jackal swears. It's like, ain't I a stinker, almost. And I don't know. I'm sure that's not what they wanted to be broadcasting, but that's sure how it came off to me.
This issue took me forever to find a copy of, to buy. It's one of those issues that, right, because it introduces the Punisher. You can buy, most of the issues in this era for like $10 to $20 if you look hard enough. But this one is always really pricey.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. And eventually I did find that one that was in my price range that was of a quality that I wanted, and I was actually at the same show that Jerry Conway was at, so I got lucky enough to get him to sign my copy, and nice. That was pretty fun. And so it's one of my. I don't love this issue, but it was kind of a fun hunt to go looking for.
Nice.
Sure.
So Dan, why are you kind of lukewarm on this issue compared to others?
Well, I mean, I think even compared to the two previous, I feel like the mystery of the Vulture was a little richer. The subplots were a little more interesting. I just have always been kind of cold on the mystery of the Jackal. I think the idea of ultimately with the cloning where the Jackal goes in this arc is interesting, but I never bought into the whole who is the Jackal thing, perhaps because of what you guys were saying, but it just feels like a mystery concocted out of nowhere. And then, as neat as the Punisher is, the kind of misunderstanding amongst heroes and with each other, I think is kind of really even starting to beginning to wear out at this point in time. So to me, it's just like a bunch of kind of reused tropes with new costumes on them. And it's fine, but I don't love it.
I can see that. It seemed to have a lot of stuff thrown into this issue almost to see what would stick a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. This issue is the classic backdoor pilot. Where we're gonna put a character in this story with a well-established in this scenario, comic book series, when in TV it would be a TV series, hoping that he'll catch on enough to then warrant his own book. Just like they introduce a character onto a TV show, hoping that there'll be enough to launch into their own side series as a spinoff, and that's very much what I feel like they were trying to do here with the Punisher is, let's make this character catch on. Let's give him enough backstory where people are hooked enough to want to read more about him.
I'll also admit that I don't love stories about Spider-Man's kill code and the kill codes of others. I feel like this kind of element of superhero stories is a little overplayed, and I just get tired of kind of people discussing the intricacies of how far they're able to go with their vigilantism. I think especially now in modern Spider-Man, it's every other story is about how he can't kill someone. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's just kind of makes me look back in hindsight going these are not my favorite types of stories.
Yeah.
Well, one of my favorite stories is the next two issues.
Now, before we even get into the issue itself, Chris, I want to point out that I am not a man who notices very often the change in a letterer. But from issue 129 and the letters of John Costanza to issue 130 and the lettering of Art Simic, and just how distinctly different the font is.
No, you're right.
Actually threw me for a loop. And I was getting so used to the way the comic looked with that fashion that this issue actually really took me a while. And I actually much prefer the previous style of font, but then again, that's the choice of a letterer right there, and it's one of the few instances where I'm like, oh my god, I actually noticed it.
Yeah, I can see that.
Well, it's suddenly winter in the Marvel Universe, and we're gonna get a Hammerhead Spider-Mobile story. I always find the winter issues of Spider-Man or Marvel stories really bizarre because they're clearly timed typically with real world winter, which can't last long because they're gonna only put out like 2 or 3 issues.
Right.
And you get the sense that New York and the Marvel Universe is this freakish climate.
It sure is.
You can almost hear the wind.
But who knows? Though I do like on this cover that there's like a George Washington statue that is labeled Ramita.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah. That's a really good point. I didn't catch that. Oh, boy. Yeah. And the Jackal looks way cooler on the cover than he does anywhere else. I'll safely say that.
That's fair.
Yeah. But again, some lovingly painted, skyscrapers and what have you by Ross Andrews. So it's unmistakably New York, even if it is suddenly Siberia.
Not only that, I have a tradition. Every Christmas Eve, I take my original copies of 130 and 131. Mm-hmm. I sit down in front of the fire and I read them.
Wow.
Because these are Christmas-themed stories.
Mm-hmm.
And again, these are early Bronze Age stories I loved since I was a little kid. And the cover alone is so absurd for issue 130 that Hammerhead is ramming his head into a dune buggy.
In winter.
And in winter. And as a kid, I was like, wow, look at this. What's going on here? And I was hooked from that moment forward. Like,
yeah.
I do like we'll get to it too, but I do like that Peter references at some point this issue or next one that he doesn't have a cave to keep the buggy in.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'd like to comment on the fact that they had to put the spider symbols in between the wheels because clearly that's a thing that's something of this nature needs. And also, now that it's the middle of winter, even cooler that it doesn't have a roof. That interior is getting ruined.
What I find interesting as I read this now as an adult is, we were kind of referencing this before, like suddenly all of a sudden the Jackal wants to take over the entire underworld.
Yeah.
And he boasts how he has no mob. He can kind of do it all by himself in his green briefs and his bodysuit. And he is a pretty underwhelming villain, isn't he?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
In response to our comments about the previous issue, though, this one does a much better job of making it look like a man in a suit.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Good
You
point.
can see the flesh underneath the mask.
Yeah.
And his eyes in the holes of the mask too. Yeah.
It doesn't look furry. It looks like a suit.
Well, we've also got some assistance on inking in this issue, as the usual inker of Dave Hunt gets assistance from Frank Giacoa in this issue.
Who's a master.
Yeah.
But that's the same team as was on issue number 129. Though.
Oh, was it really? Okay. All right. Never mind. I take it back. But then again, it's also possible that one of the inkers versus the other drew the Jackal in this to make him look a little bit more man and suitish versus green Jackal without a crotch.
Although in the panel where you can see his eyes and the flesh tone, he does have hairy knuckles, which is kind of odd.
Interesting.
I mean, that's nitpicky, but I do notice it.
Yeah.
Don't we all?
So let's talk about Petey goes to the Baxter building. He wakes up the torch.
Yep.
And it was I always like how they referenced the sort of the prickly friendship between Johnny and Spider-Man, and sort of the ribbing between them. But there's also that affection and respect.
Mm-hmm.
And then they show you because they've been teasing us with this car for the past several issues, including us showing them beginning to construct it. And I have to wonder, what did fans think when they finally see the real thing in this bottom panel? And Peter goes, "That's what I call a fiasco."
I'm thinking fancy speed buggy.
Yeah. Was Speed Buggy also the name of the talking buggy in the cartoon?
Oh, yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
The late great Mel Blanc.
Mm-hmm.
I could be wrong, but I do believe that and I haven't read through the issues, but I do believe that there were letters written in complaining about the idea of the Spider-Mobile, like that it was inappropriate for the character. I say that because there was an annual a few years ago. I guess it's probably like 10 years ago now. It was like a flashback to when Spider-Man and Captain America first met. Mm-hmm. And it was like kind of back in this era. And, Steve Wacker tweeted something like, "I'm looking for letters that are styled around the era of like the early 1970s to put in a letters column." So, of course, I quickly jumped at the opportunity and like found I think an exact letter complaining about the Spider-Mobile and wrote one that was like a fanboyish about like Spider-Man should get a spider plane or whatever. And they actually printed it in the issue.
Oh my god,
that's awesome.
Yeah, and so we actually had like a listener of our show write in to like be like I can't really trust you. Why would you advocate for a spider plane? And I was like just slapping my head like it was a joke, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, clearly
Anyway.
what he needs is a spider submarine. I mean, that's what he needs more than anything else.
For sure. Yes,
You can
absolutely.
spider rocket.
So what I find fascinating is why is the torch ripping on Bangor, Maine? Hey, Dumbo, we're learning to drive anyway. Bangor, Maine. That always confused me. I was like, what's he got against Bangor, Maine? Do they not know how to drive in Bangor, Maine?
I don't know.
But the fact that the Spider-Mobile goes the wrong way on Park Avenue, then onto the sidewalk. No police anywhere, though, which is lucky for Spidey, because he's already wanted for murder, and he's about to go over pedestrians. But he cheerfully mentions that I've only owned a motorcycle. I don't know how to drive.
Well, let's jump right behind the wheel and start tearing out in the snow.
I fight supervillains every day. How hard can driving be?
Yeah.
Do we think this car... Does this car have any place at all in this world, or is it just absurd right from the get-go?
Oh, it's absurd right from the get-go.
Yeah.
Unless you're in the Mojave Desert or cruising up the California coast or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it has no place whatsoever in New York. And mind you, I've seen some weird-ass cars in New York. Like, I've seen cars that were completely out of place parked on the streets of New York. I've also seen, like, random renovated 1910s, 1920s era cars driving around the streets of New York. And yet, not once have I seen a dune buggy that looked anything like this on the streets of New York. And I don't care if you're a superhero or not, it don't belong. It's out of place.
But wait, Ian, this issue gets even weirder, so just hang on.
Oh, okay, great.
So Doc Ock is introduced. He kind of just nonchalantly walking around the city with his arm sticking out. I guess he's not concerned about the police.
Nope. Doc Ock is one of those villains that when he's done right, he could be menacing and creepy. And when he's done like this, he can be done very silly.
Yeah.
I never liked Andrew's design for Ock either. Like I think he just he looks so silly. He's got this kind of block-ish head. And it's like I like my Otto kind of chubby. His is just kind of like this guy is more skull than anything else. Like he's just like the most like ill-looking person.
Looks
Let's
almost
point
like
out
a caveman.
Yeah, that's a good point, Shane. Let's note, in case listeners aren't aware, that at this point in the Spider-Man saga, Aunt May is living at Doc Ock's Westchester estate. I guess almost like as his guest, essentially. Because remember, back in the Silver Age, he was a boarder at the Parker home.
Yeah.
Otto was.
That's right. That's right.
They became friends in Annual #1.
Yep.
There's mention made in here somewhere that Octavius took her on as a housekeeper for a bit.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But there was always some kind of affection between her and Otto. So they're playing up that here. Again, I want to put, because I just love Andrew's design sense. When Mary Jane comes by Peter's pad, which he's still sharing with Harry, though Harry is obviously MIA. And then when he has Peter changing in his bedroom and then Mary Jane's in their living room, and he kind of breaks the wall for the readers, they can see both sides. I just love his design sense. It's and then Peter, like, this is the most hip Peter Parker I've seen. Like, he comes out in like this really snazzy, like, ski sweater and the boots, and Mary Jane's got an Aretha album in her hand, and
Luffy, let's hit the slopes.
Yeah. Is that what you're wearing when you read this issue in front of the fire every year, Chris?
I think we know the answer to that. The answer to that is heck yes.
God, Bird, I'm glad you're here.
Is there any hot toddy around?
But I love Andrew's like fashion sense in these early '70s books.
Although the fact that that the building that gets blown up directly beneath them is for some reason purple.
I was just going to comment on that. I've seen a lot of things in New York, but a building that color is it's not one of them.
Yeah, unless it's part of some sort of like it's soon to be like built like a mural or something like that. It ain't going to be purple.
By the way, as a little continuity note, Peter wears this sweater more than once during Conway and Andrew's run.
Okay. Go figure.
And then we see the Spider-Mobile in action for the first time.
Yep. Yeah, it sure is something, isn't it?
Dan, do you find any saving graces about this vehicle besides just the goofy absurdity of it?
No, but that's what makes it great. I mean, like, I don't get any sense that Conway was trying for anything but that. You know, like it was designed with that very idea in mind, and it exists as such. I mean, this is the vehicle that he would then later have rise out of the Hudson River and attack Spider-Man like a spider slayer. You know, its silliness is the joy of it. Yeah.
I also forget whether I brought this up last issue or not, but if they didn't go out of business after the failure of the Spider Buggy, Corona Motors certainly would have gone out of business like about 3 months ago with their name and the times as they are now. Like you never know when a product name is going to wind up becoming a lot more relevant.
Even the hucksterism of their Stanley analog probably couldn't have saved them there, Ian. That's
exactly.
A good point.
Yeah.
Well, after the Spider-Mobile here, they went into beer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What's going on with Corona beer right now? Do we know if they've been like hit horribly by this?
Oh, my favorite part, Dan, is like right when the coronavirus hit, they came out with their new hard seltzer. And I started seeing ads for Corona hard seltzer like almost immediately after lockdown started on Hulu. And I'm like, ooh, you're not going to sell a lot of these, no.
Yeah, yeah. I saw a lot of things of stupidity going. Oh, I can't drink Corona now. Okay, yeah, that's what that's what caused it.
Right,
it's the beer.
Meanwhile, speaking of Ross Andrews and his art, Hammerhead looks a lot more like Anvil Head in this issue.
Yeah.
I always found Hammerhead. I almost said Hammy Head. I almost found Hammerhead one of the more endearingly goofy villains in Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery. I mean, the real put on, see kind of accent.
Well, and I don't know why I think of it, but I almost feel like he has the voice of Eraserhead from Duck Tracy. I'm going to rub you out, see? Rub you out.
Yes, exactly. Hey, Mom, look at the new Dick Tracy character, Hammerhead.
What I love about Hammerhead is his origin story is that, like, he was not like a New York gangster guy. He just like had a traumatic head injury and woke up and saw a poster for like this universe's like a gangster movie in the Spider-Man universe and was like, that's it. I'm a gangster now. So all of this is just a put on. Like he's not, it's just a result of a traumatic head injury. Like if I were to knock my head on like the wall at some point and saw like all of my Spider-Man art, I would start springing around my apartment. I mean, one could only wish, but yeah.
Have you been injured in an accident? Call the law offices of Jameson, Parker, and Robertson today, and we'll make sure you get what you deserve.
Call Murdoch Nelson.
Dan, I know you're short on time, so do you want to make some more comments about just what's going to happen here with Aunt May and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, this issue is famously concludes with, Spider-Man stumbling on Aunt May and Otto's marriage or marriage ceremony, with my favorite detail in like all of Spider-Man comics, which is the gangster who's wiping away a tear during the ceremony. Just so absurd. I mean, 131, and I'll say it before I head out, and I apologize for having to leave a little bit early.
Not a problem.
It has been fun. 131 is one of the most absurd Spider-Man comics ever.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, like, there's a lot of them that are championing for that, but this one just that it is so tied to a core facet of Spider-Man, which is Aunt May and Dr. Octopus. The very fact that Aunt May, in like the death of her brother, inherits a island with a nuclear refinery that has like an already built-in helicopter pad and facility. It's just so completely out of left field. Only to end the issue with a giant atomic explosion that kills Otto and Hammerhead. I'm sorry, I'm spoiling all this.
Oh,
it's just a lot to digest.
And you know what? It's fine because you know what? They got better, so it's fine.
Yeah, well, I mean, Hammerhead got better in that we got several issues detailing Hammerhead's ghost just floating through the series, which like is I have a hard time getting those words out just generally. So yeah, I mean, these are really weird comics, and I think you can kind of see the kind of youth of Jerry Conway in all of its negative aspects maybe here. It's like playing a little too loose. I know you love these issues, but I'm sure you will love them somewhat ironically.
Oh, I love them for exactly the reasons you're describing, Dan. Absolutely. Come on.
Yeah. I mean, like, one of my favorite issues is like the War of the Reptiles, where it's Stegron versus the lizard as he tries to reanimate skeletons from the Natural History Museum.
That's a Christmas story too.
It is a Christmas story, yeah. And so, I mean, yeah, the silly stuff is the fun stuff. I appreciate your love of these. Yeah, they are really bizarre.
I'm sorry,
yeah.
go ahead. You made a good point about Conway's youth, though, because at the same time, like the scenes in the Christmas party, again shows his great command of subplot.
Yeah,
and of the supporting characters, and like Mary Jane's fear and about falling for Peter, and Betty's discerning that, and then Robbie comes in and gives his wisdom about relationships, and Ned is just being Ned, and man, that guy was a blank slate for the most part. But so that stuff is all great, and again, it's also like we talked before about weird dichotomies. So you have this stuff going on at the party, and then Peter's trying to hang on to the bottom of a helicopter in Arctic temperatures as they approach the nuclear breeder reactor on the Canadian island. Oh, it's terrific.
I think I wrote down the actual line. She inherited a Canadian island with one of the richest supplies of uranium found in nature, where there's already an airfield and one of the world's most sophisticated nuclear breeding reactors.
Yes.
Like, that is a sentence, yeah.
What does Department H think about this? That's the question. Like, oh boy! All right, Dan. I know you got to head out. You want to give folks your information one last time before you roll?
Yeah, sure. I hope I'll come back relatively soon, guys. So
Definitely.
thanks for having me.
Our pleasure.
This was
Dan,
a
I've
lot
got
of
some
fun.
plans. I got some plans about a man named Stern. I'll be in touch down the road.
Oh, great, because we're about to do a whole season on Stern. You mentioned a particular villain mystery that was resolved in an uncomfortable way, and
Yes.
we've got 3 or 4 episodes planned.
Oh,
with
wow.
interviews with every single person involved in that.
Oh my God, yes.
So if you're into said bad guy, come hang
My
around
favorite
for that.
guys.
Yeah, my favorite as well. So yeah, that's all over at Amazing Spider Talk, and that's our podcast. You can go to amazingspidertalk.com, and it will kind of get you set up on all those things, or just find us anywhere. We'd love to have you, and go check out season 1 of our show. We're in the middle. We just finished season 4, so you can get caught up relatively quickly and join us with all of our merriment. And guys, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun, and I hope to talk to you soon.
All right.
Thanks
Our,
for
our,
coming
our
on,
pleasure
Dan.
too, man. Take care.
Take care. Thank you.
All righty. Now, my biggest concern with this whole wedding thing, did Peter's invite get lost in the mail?
That's a good
Well,
point.
I wondered how all of a sudden they were engaged and married with Peter not knowing any of it.
Yeah, like he was just on the phone with Aunt May.
Yeah.
An issue beforehand, and she didn't suddenly bring up, "Oh, by the way, are you coming next Saturday?" Like,
I have something important to tell you.
Yeah,
Mary Jane showed up, and Peter had to give her the brush off in a hurry. So that's probably what that call was about.
I guess,
I
but
guess, but
yeah,
that's pretty important.
yes, and for as loving an aunt as Aunt May is, I do not believe personally she would have gone forward with a wedding without her, one relative that's still alive, because apparently her other one just died and she inherited a frickin' island.
And I also think that May isn't really in character in these stories.
No, she's not.
Because May is granted, while she's physically always frail, that's the long-running joke about Aunt May always being at death's door. She's a very strong character in terms of like her inner fiber, and she almost seems like mesmerized here in a sense, like she's not really herself.
Well, okay, so at the end of this issue, when you see them at the wedding, I kind of wondered if the next issue we weren't going to find out that he had done something to her to marry her. But then when you get to the end of that issue, I'm like, oh, well, okay. Is it ever brought up? Or she really was marrying him? Like, it just seemed a little disjointed for me at that point.
Yeah. Well, the giant atomic explosion that nobody ever mentions again is adds to that feeling of disjunction. I mean, you
Yeah.
hear about Ian, about Department 8 sitting up and taking notice. How about the rest of the global community?
Yeah,
A
right.
giant atomic explosion off the coast of the civilized nation. A giant atomic explosion anywhere in the world, you'd think would at least make a few lines, and nope. Just puts the exclamation point on this issue, and it makes not a ripple anywhere else in the universe.
In response, Canada was just like, sorry.
Hammerhead, the fact that he in his own buffoonery triggers the chain reaction because when what Dan was referring to, some issues down the road, they show you actually what immediately happens after he charges at Octavius. And there's actually a moment where his head is actually lodged into the metal casing and he can't get out. And everybody's trying to flee out of the reactor. And one of Ock's minions finds like a special tube that you can slide yourself into, something that'll make you survive the blast. And Ock throws the guy out and then he puts himself in. That's how Ock survives, basically.
Okay.
And Hammerhead, of course, becomes a sort of radioactive ghost.
You mean Dr. Octavius didn't put himself inside of a refrigerator when the atomic bomb was going off to survive?
A lead-lined refrigerator.
Yes. Yeah. When I found out that was originally in the script for Back to the Future.
Really?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
So-
Yeah, they were going to use a fridge at first.
Yeah. So that was originally in the script for Back to the Future, and the fact that Spielberg came back around and then used that for Indiana Jones. Wowzers.
I had heard they changed it. They were afraid too many kids would try it.
Yes.
Wait, meaning Back to the Future that we're going to use the fridge as the time machine?
Yes.
Yeah. No. Well, no. There was going to be some sort of scene. Oh no. Now I remember. The climactic scene of the movie where they need the lightning in order to power the time machine.
Yep.
It was going to turn out that the only way that they could get that power was to go to a nuclear reactor.
Oh.
Oh, okay.
And the nuclear reactor at some point was going to explode. And the way that Marty gets out of it is by getting into a lead-lined refrigerator.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad they didn't go that way.
No.
Yeah. But again, Spielberg sure as heck did in that fourth Indiana Jones movie, and yowzers.
All the quarter-century-old ideas to circle back and reuse.
Tell me about it, Murd. I know.
Putting aside for a moment the delightful absurdity of the whole Canadian Island action sequence, the last page when Mary Jane's leaving Betty's Christmas party, again, I love Conway's command of the supporting character where Mary Jane's talking about, her mixed feelings about Peter and how she just can't commit to him because she said, I like the guy too much for that kind of scene. Listen, it's getting too heavy. Let's leave it for some other time, okay? So when you think about the character of Mary Jane Watson, it's really Jerry Conway who started to really make her into the character we find so compelling.
Oh, yeah.
Lee, of course, and Ramita did the whole party girl thing and photography hit the jackpot and all that, but it's Conway starts to give the character real depth. And as I think it was Ian mentioned before, really makes her a great partner for Peter. So these issues are very important when it comes to the development of that character.
Yeah. Yep, definitely. I'd say probably the character he has the best command of at this point is Mary Jane. Although I do like his Peter and I like his Spider-Man, you can tell that he has a real depth of character when it comes to Mary Jane in particular, whether it's because he liked her or just because this is the character that he really wanted to flesh out. They were all steps in the right direction.
Well, I kind of wonder if he didn't have a direction he wanted to go in and found some kind of pacing for what would satisfy him in a story and just went with it. And it just fit at the right time with the way everything else in Peter's story was going.
Yeah.
This just made sense to move forward in this way.
Absolutely.
Like someone said before, it's interesting to have this kind of clarity in storytelling and characters inside this quagmire of silliness going around.
Yeah.
Good point, Shane. Very excellent observation.
Especially an issue like this, which is very, very silly.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's delightful.
Off the hook silly.
Oh, my. Another thing that I wanted to point out art-wise, what do you guys think of the design of Doc Ock's tentacles as portrayed by Andrew? Because I feel like they're kind of just tubes.
Yeah.
And that's not my favorite portrayal of the tentacles. I like them to have a little bit more pincer action and a little bit more noticeable appendages on the ends.
Well, they do show you one scene, Ian, where the appendages grab onto Spider-Man's shirt.
That's true. Yeah.
So you do get that.
But they look a little bit too hidden.
Yeah.
For my taste.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
Anything else you guys want to say about this issue?
Just that going with what we've already said about Aunt May's character portrayal being off, I'm reminded yet again of the what if that I discussed at the beginning of this episode, where when she finds out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, she immediately faints and like, oh no, my nephew is that horrid Spider-Man, woo, and then has like a giant fit and they have to rush her off to the hospital. That's the type of Aunt May that I like least. I like an Aunt May that at least has some sort of personality to her outside of plot points and fainting. And this is an Aunt May that is a plot point more than she is a character. And I've seen other portrayals where she's not, and I'm sure Jerry Conway, because again, come on, he was 19 at the time. Like he doesn't exactly know how to, he's not relating that much to the old woman of the story. It's not her book. I'm sure that as time goes on, he probably gets a better grasp of the character as well. But I don't think he really cared that much about Aunt May, and I think it shows in this story.
I think, and to add to that, Ian, and I was just referenced this before with Dan, is that at some point down the road, I'd like to bring him back to talk about like a choice run from the 80s, like especially the Roger Stern stuff. And I think we get into the 1980s, they really start to flesh out Aunt May a lot more as a character. Like she has boarders come into her house, she gets a boyfriend at one point, and they just do a lot with her personality, which you always kind of glimpsed, but like you said, a lot of the times Aunt May is that plot point. She's always sick. Peter has to run and get medicine for her. He has to worry about protecting her and his identity and all of that. You see that over and over and over again. But May's strength, which you always kind of get a glimpse of, it really comes out in later decades in the character's run.
Yes.
So
absolutely,
there's good stuff with it. And in fact, as I think about it now, and I'm sorry, Dan Leck, I'd love to hear his thoughts on this, but when they do issue 400, which is written by J.M. DeMatteis. And I think you've mentioned before, Ian, the terrible cover they did for that one.
Oh, God.
But and they have Aunt May, quote, die in that issue.
Yeah.
And it's J.M. DeMatteis. It's a beautifully written story. And it really goes into the heart of who Aunt May is. Then, of course, they later retcon and ruin it by saying it was an actor hired by Norman Osborn.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
That's such a – I mean, the 90s for me is like a black hole for Spider-Man. But but that issue, until they ruined it, I thought was beautifully written.
Agreed.
Because they really you've read the story, I assume, Ian.
I have, yes.
Yeah, because in that issue that who you think is Aunt May says she reveals that she always knew Peter was Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And it's beautifully done, and they just killed it. We can talk about that down the road. But
definitely.
Aunt May has a lot of great stories, especially as we move further into the character's history. So.
On an opposite side, from last issue, my favorite J. Jonah Jameson moment was him telling Peter that he has a great gift for him, and he takes out the cigar. Like, gee, thanks, JJ. But my favorite J. Jonah Jameson moment of this issue, 131, is where we get in the middle of this conversation of and he's all, and that's when I told the mayor, "Sir, you're crazy. If there's one subject J. Jonah Jameson knows, it's New York." Well, that shook him up.
Yeah.
Everybody flees from around him. Yep.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Any closing thoughts on this, gentleman?
Some of it just goofy fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, as Ian observed in our last episode, this range of 11 issues it's all over the place tonally. It runs the full gamut from the sublime to the ridiculous. These last couple of issues that we've talked about here are fitting into the latter category. I do feel like the credit that I gave Conway for representing a different level of subtlety and finesse as compared to Stan Lee, he kind of gave the lie to that in this this little two-parter with the edible marriage of Dr. Octopus and Aunt May and the exploding island. But whether sublime or ridiculous, it's all classic Spider-Man, and it's all good.
And I think that's what works best about Spider-Man, is that for as many serious issues, for as many as touching character moments, for as many well remembered villain turns and all that, you get the ridiculous and you get the crazy and you get the zany, and they sort of mesh and mix and match. Like it changes things up. And Spider-Man as a series has had many different tones, even in the middle of arcs by creators. I mean, look at Dan Slott's run as a perfect example. Like he would have some very serious issues, and then he would have some ridiculous issues. And that's very much what Jerry Conway is playing with here, is the different styles that you can inject into a book like Spider-Man and make it work. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes an island explodes in the middle of Canada, and you're like, okay, that happened. So we're just gonna move forward, right? Okay, cool, whatever.
Ian, I think that's a great way to round up sort of this period, and you've made an excellent observation, because just the character, the whole premise is it just offers a wonderful sort of launch pad for all kinds of plot devices. I mean, I can think of stories. Some of the stories that DeMatteis did in Spectacular Spider-Man that are really funny, that are like involving like the leapfrog and all this different stuff, and that are just goofy, zany fun. And then you have stories like the death of Gwen, which are just devastating. So somehow, I mean, some works more than other, but it all kind of, when you kind of all put it together, there's just such a charm to it. Even like this goofy Canadian island. So again, like Dan said, that story is totally absurd.
Yeah.
But I love it because it's so ridiculous. And then you have the great subplot going on within all that. So there's that dichotomy too, which is just I get a kick out of.
Yep, absolutely.
So, Jim, I want to thank you because this was my idea, and I really appreciate the indulgence. This was
thanks for suggesting it.
My pleasure. I mean, again, it gets me to read more classic Spider-Man, and that's always a positive.
Splendid.
Yep, and of course, one last comment. Some of the best lettering that I've seen, or at least always comes back to the sound effects, and I will leave you with "Braka Braka Traka Chow." Classic. It's a helicopter. Braka Braka Traka Chow. Like, okay, why not? Amazing. Spectacular. Web of. Titleless. Okay.
God.
I've clearly gone loopy, so it's time to end.
Indeed.
But before we do, yet again, big thanks to Dan for joining us, and he gave his information and all that. But I'll also mention that if you want to find him on Twitter, you can do so as well. His handle is Sup Spider Talk, because I remember originally the show was Superior Spider Talk. And then it morphed into what it is. So it's SUP Spider Talk, all one word. You'll find Dan Gvozden's Twitter there for the Amazing Spider Talk, where he goes into not just Spider-Man stuff, but also random musings, and also further investigation stuff on the whole Norman Osborn thing you can find over there.
Yes.
Yep, so big thanks to him on there. And, of course, one more big thanks to any and all listeners who have been donating to the show over the last couple of months. You guys are our heroes. You keep the lights on. And as long as you're listening, we are happy. But if you can throw a little bit more our way, one way or the other, great. Otherwise, just keep on listening, and that's all we want you to do.
Amen.
All right, Shane. The floor is yours once I bring up the darn music. Here we go, okay? I am clearly prepared tonight. Okay. And ready to roll.
Okay, visit us at comicgeekspeak.com to send us an email. The address is comicgeekspeak@gmail.com. To leave a voicemail, the number is 267-702-6642. Stop by thecomicforums.vanillacommunity.com. Let us know what you think of these Spider-Man issues. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. Thanks to everyone who contributes to the episodes. We appreciate it. Thanks again to Dan for coming on. Always a good time to have Dan on. And as always, we are uniting the world's mightiest heroes, one listener at a time.
You got it on Wednesday, and you was psyched about it going to the volume up. These guys will talk about it, everything that geeks love. From cakes to laser beams, opinions like the seasons, and everything you read in comics, movies, games, toys, artists, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek. Uniting the world's mightiest heroes. This is Comic Geek Speak.
The episode is over. It must be because they know that I, Harry Osborn, am the Green Goblin!